Hey y'all, welcome back to your grandma series. Having fun time, aren't we? No or not? Well, okay, I don't care. Okay, I don't give a shit. Just tell her I miss her. Can you stop with the grandma stuff? Well, it's the only thing I can think of on the fly, and I don't know. Back to pretending to be serious. Welcome to the philosophy series, or whatever I called it. I don't even remember now. Just the cover is still off, by the way. So I'm gonna blame you for that one. So I don't know. Maybe don't be so shitty. Welcome back to a historical critical view of the speculative philosophy of Europe in the 19th century, part 5. Where do we leave off, y'all? I don't know. This part's called section 3, and we are still in the introduction, mind you. Rise of philosophy. See, I fucking every time. Rise of philosophy inevitable. Can I just, again, I'm just gonna, real quick. It says, rise of philosophy inevitable. Can we just put an is in there? I don't know. Okay. Thus far, we have attempted to remove the chief objections which led many to consider the speculative philosophy, whether of a former age or of their own, as altogether valueless. Not only do we think, however, that these popular prejudices are groundless, but we go a step further and regard speculative philosophy as a thing absolutely inevitable. As inevitable as the wants, desires, and tendencies of the human mind can make it. If, from the fact of its universality, we may consider any branch of our mental activity whatever to be a necessary result of our constitution. Assuredly, we may do so with regard to the philosophic spirit. Every age of the world and every nation, the mind of which has attained to any degree of cultivation, have had their different philosophies, that is, have attempted to unravel the problems of their own existence, and those of the universe they behold around them. The grave and contemplative Asiatic silence brooding over their subjects in earlier stages of man's history, the lively and versatile mind of Greece could not fail to think deeply and to grapple earnestly with the same great questions. The Roman intellect, at first taken up with practical toils of warfare and government, was constrained, so soon as the opportunity came, to tread in the same path, notwithstanding it had been already so diligently explored. And Christianity, when it offered peace to the spirit of man wounded by the consciousness of moral imperfection, and satisfied the heart's longing in immortality, did not repress, but rather incited the intellect to greater exertion in order to sound the depth of our being, and fully to comprehend the relation to the infinite and eternal. This is just giving examples of philosophy's effects throughout different peoples and times. The Middle Ages, which witnessed the almost total decline of literature, present us still with a speculative of human reason struggling on amidst all the surrounding darkness. In order to look beneath the phenomenal world and to seek after the foundations of human knowledge. And ever since the revival of our modern civilization has given a fresh impulse to the human mind, the whole region of speculative philosophy has been one of the principal objects upon which it has applied its awakened energies. It is no more possible for the spirit of philosophy to become extinguished, than for the poetic fire to die out of humanity, or the religious faculty to cease to operate within the mind of man. For as long as the impulse of intellectual faculties exists, it will ever be seeking satisfaction. Interesting, isn't that? That's pretty, okay. That philosophy, then, will ever flourish among mankind in every age. We may regard as a fair inference from past experience, but now we may go a step beyond experience and show that its rise is rendered inevitable by the very nature of human knowledge and the impulse we possess for acquiring it. To prove this, we must establish two facts. First, that the power of accurate generalization is the true index by which the extent of our knowledge is measured. And secondly, that every branch of human knowledge, if generalized, is to its full extent, brings us into the region of metaphysical research. To establish the former of these two principles, we must remember that the human knowledge does not consist in bare collection and enumeration of facts. This alone would be of little service did we not attempt to classify them, and to adduce from such classifications general laws and principles. The knowledge, which consists of individual truths, could never be either extensive or definite, for the multiplicity of objects, which must then crowd it upon the mind, only tends to confound and perplex it, while the memory, overburdened with particulars, is not able to retain the 100th part of the material which are collected. To prevent this, the power of generalization comes to our aid, by which the individual facts are so classified under their proper conceptions, that they may at the same time be more easily retained, and their several relations to all other branches of knowledge accurately defined. The colligation and classification of facts, then, we may regard as two first steps which are to be taken in the attainment of scientific truth. The next step after this is to inquire how these facts may be accounted for. In other words, to consider what more general facts can be discovered, in which the particular ones shall be contained. In natural science, we hear frequent mentions made of ascending from particular to general truths, of different stages of generalization, which occur in this process, and of the highest step in which all the others are preparatorily and in which they are included. To illustrate the meaning of these expressions, let us take the case of astronomy. Any careless observer can perceive the ordinary fact upon which that science is founded. The laborer and at his daily toil knows that the moon, the sun, and the planets rise and set at a particular period. The slightest attention, again, would be sufficient to tell us that the moon goes through a certain course of changes within a month, and the sun within a year. All these facts, however, are included in and explained by the more general fact that the earth moves in an orbit round the sun, and the moon round the earth. This fact, again, is included in the dynamical law, by which the movements of all the heavenly bodies are regulated, and this, again, in the universal law of gravitation. The difference, therefore, between knowledge, which a careless speculator possesses, of any one of the simple facts of astronomy, and that the possessed by the man of science, lies here, that the one observes the phenomenon simply as a phenomenon, while the other investigates it, places it in connection with other facts, ascends from the particular to the general, and gets so much more near to the universal law or principle from which it proceeds. They're getting to the source, truth, source, truth, source. The man who only observes the simple phenomena, we say, possesses the least knowledge. He who ascends to the more general proposition enlarges his knowledge proportionately. And lastly, his knowledge is the greatest who attains the highest point of generalization, and induces the fact which includes it in all the rest. If we were to adduce any other branch of human knowledge, we should find that same principle would hold good, that the ignorant observer might know as much as the bare facts as anyone else, and that the philosopher in every case owes his superiority to the process of generalization. In asserting this principle, of course, we suppose that generalization is not hasty and inaccurate, since in that case it could only give rise to false theories. We take for granted that it is an inference drawn from sufficiently wide and accurate analysis. When this is the case, it becomes evident that accurate generalization, implying, as it does, both the most complete observation of the individual phenomenon, and as a reference to them to their proper conceptions and laws, is always the index of our real knowledge, and just as far as we know can legitimately extend it, so far may our knowledge be said to reach. Viewing this first principle, then, as valid, we shall go on to illustrate the substantial, the second, namely, that every branch of human knowledge, if generalized to its full extent, brings us into the region of metaphysical research, that there is no subject of investigation, but tends incessantly to this point, that even those subjects which are most unlike in themselves, and which lead us through entirely different fields of mental labor, yet all, if you trace them far enough, meet together in their first principles, and all enter the peculiar region of the metaphysician before you have reached their ultimate basis. To illustrate this, almost any subject will answer equally well. The chemist, for example, investigates matters, tracing it by means of observation and experiment through all its different combinations and changes. But who does not know that the last question at which he arrives, that which weighs the relative claims of ultimate atoms and of infinite divisibility, is one of a purely metaphysical nature? The mechanician studies the law of forces and exhibits the material universe, but the explication of the very conception upon which the whole science rests, that of power or causation, again brings us to the province of speculative philosophy. The fundamental axioms and definitions of pure mathematics are just of the same nature. They too can only be investigated and explained upon metaphysical grounds. That just is a weird sentence. If from these branches of science we turn to that allotted to the psychologist, we find ourselves in another region of thought, at the basis of which lies the mysterious idea of life, an idea which is closely connected with some of the most interesting problems in the whole range of speculative philosophy. It is not only those subjects, however, which come under the notice of science that lead us up through the several stages of generalization to the ethereal region of metaphysical speculation. Every branch of human knowledge, if investigated to a similar extent, leads exactly to the same point. Take, for example, the providence of historians, a providence which appears at first sight to confine itself entirely to an investigation and a description of eternal facts. The primary object of the historian is the truth, and how it may be considered simply this: to discover events as they occur, and to describe them in the best possible manner. But the truth, philosophical historians, is far from being content with this. He looks upon the phenomenon of human life and activity as the direct result of human nature, as it exists in the world, and seeks to trace them in their proper source, to the constitution of the human mind. The subject of government, as it has appeared in the different stages and countries of our earth, leads us directly to the deeper question concerning the foundation of man's natural rights. For all government is constructed upon the primary conception of right or justice, and must be adjudged in fundamentally good or bad according to its agreement or disagreement with it. If we search again into the history of civilization and learning, or of the arts and sciences, as they have sprung up and made greater or lesser advancements among different nations, here too we are insensibly led to the study of the human mind. All civilizations are an effect which must spring from certain causes, and the object of these philosophical historians in tracing it is to point out the influence and forms from government, various features of natural scenery, various modes of religion, various circumstances in general, have had in stimulating man to exertion in different directions and towards different objects. The history is, in fact, a detail of the various manifestations of mind, as they have been impressed upon the surface of human life, and the philosophical historian will attempt to deduce from the past those laws of human action, which have heretofore molded the features of society, and which we may predict will, under similar circumstances, operate in a similar manner of the future. This whole branch of human knowledge, therefore, leads us inevitably to the study of man, to the investigation of the primary laws of the human mind, and only when it has pursued its inquiries to that point does it attain a high degree of generalization, and gives us a full satisfaction in its results. To adduce another instance of the intimate connection that subsides between the various branches to which our mental activity is directed, and speculative philosophy, I would point out that the fine arts. Here, as in most other subjects, there is a practical and theoretical side, the former of which, although it may be successfully pursued by itself, is nevertheless based upon the latter. Poetry may be loved, and may be created by the impulse of an enthusiastic soul, and the exertion of a lively imagination, without any reflection upon the sources from which the poetic fire is kindled. But the inquiry will still force itself upon us in due time. What is enthusiasm? What is the nature of creative imagination? And what is the ground upon which the pleasure we derive from all such sources depends? The answer to this, it is evident, will lead us to an abundant metaphysical inquiries, long before we have probed the subject to its complete elucidation. Painting, again, may be cultivated simply by attention to practical rules, especially when there is a natural aptitude for it. But then the pleasure we derive from it arises mainly from our susceptibility of the emotion of beauty. We ask, therefore, what is beauty? How is it excited? In what does it consist? In the highest beauty real, and has it ever been actually embodied in nature? Or is the ideal and only imagined in the mind? Must the painter strive to copy exactly what exists? Or has he to seek a perfection which is only floating within his own mind, and which he must perpetually endeavor to transform from the inner chamber of imagination to the canvas before him? The decision of this point, one way or the other, will give rise to completely different schools of painting. The advocate of beau real would never become another Raphael, nor would the advocate of the beau ideal ever form a second Van Dyck. If it be asked why we should employ our minds in theorizing on these different subjects, when the practical application of them can be made without any knowledge whatsoever of their theory, we answer, because man is formed with a desire to know, as well as we do and feel, because the love of knowledge is an impulse quite as strong as those other impulses, which lead more directly to action, and because we can do more be happy without satisfying the former. When it once takes possession of our mind, then we can without satisfying the latter. That's a weird way to word that, I'm sorry. If from the fine arts we descend into pursuits and toils of practical life, here too we soon find that we are conducted step by step, as we proceed backwards towards first principles, into the region of metaphysics. Our practical life consists, for the most part, in the performance of duties. But what is duty? What claim has it over our consciousness? And on what is it grounded in its obligation? I have duties to perform towards my country. It is patriotism, then, an emotional implanted by nature. And if so, to what extent should I compromise my own natural right in favor for the community at large? The whole question of rights of nature, to which we are thus brought, leads us, as we before marked, into one of the most fruitful of all discussions on man's constitution and position in the present world. I have other duties, moreover, to perform in social life, and again others which relate simply to my own moral being. But in such cases, what is the ground and what are the rules of mortality? To elucidate these questions, we must take the torch of philosophy to our aid, and only when we have traced back the whole theory of our practical life to philosophical principles do we find a basis upon which we can rest with any mental satisfaction. These few instances, perhaps, may be sufficient to elucidate the fact that all generalization, whatever be the subject to which it is applied, tends to lead us into philosophical researches, so soon as ever it begins to touch upon first principles. Other arts and sciences aim at particular objects, accomplish particular purposes, and carry on their investigations only to a particular extent. This being accomplished, the end of each is satisfied. The philosophy, on the contrary, seeks the completion of our knowledge. It lays bare the hidden foundations upon which all other sciences rests, and weighs the validity of the axiom which they tacitly assume. No sooner do we view these different branches of human knowledge with the eye of a speculative philosopher than we begin at once to see that the courses of them are all convergent, tending perpetually to one point. Many of the minor channels, after being followed backward for a certain distance, merge into the course of some wider stream. As we go further back, the channels become fewer, though at the same time wider and deeper. But still some few remain distinct from each other, and ever exhibit a cloud of darkness enveloping their source, until the philosophic spirit dares to enter the cloud, and trace their course upon to the very point which they all unite. On this account, no doubt, philosophy may sometimes incur the charge of vagueness and indistinctness in its operations and results. But instead of joining in its complaint, we should rather admire the courage and intelligence that dared to penetrate into what was before a region of cloud and darkness, that succeeded in gaining new glimpses of an unknown land, that the struggle on against almost insuperable difficulties, even at the risk of here and there losing the road to their great results. Far should we be from regarding it as presumptuous to enter these sacred limits, or because philosophy is sometimes bewildered in the mazes it attempts to track, denounces its whole attempt as vain and fruitless. Let us now sum up the results of the foregoing considerations in a few words. Thank you. Man possesses intellectual powers, the object and constant tendencies of which is the acquisition of knowledge. The advancement of knowledge is measured by the powers of accurate generalization, and all generalization, when sufficiently extensive, brings us to the investigation of first principles. So we're going to the source, is what you're trying to say. That is, to the region of speculative philosophy. Hence, we conclude that the rise of philosophy is inevitable, being necessitated by the very nature of human knowledge, and the innate tendency we possess to acquire it. From this point of view, we can now gain a clear insight into the true idea and real office of philosophy properly, striving as it does to unite all various objects of mental pursuits to complete and form the pyramid of human knowledge, to bring even the very foundations thereof to view, and may be regarded as the science of sciences, as that which shows the connection and the basis all the rest. The intellectual philosophy, accordingly, of any age may be regarded as the last word which the reason of that age pronounces, inasmuch as its laws, politics, arts, literature, and to a certain extent its peculiar views of religion also, are but the reflex of the philosophy, which is then supreme. Or perhaps it might be more accurate were we to say that the intellectual spirit of any epoch, that which manifests itself in various channels of literacy and practical life, finds in philosophy its highest expression, and shows there more clearly its results, undistinguished form. That sounds like what I'm kind of going for with my, literati fucking writing a book, looking through the philosophy at all. It's kind of what it's saying right here, is like it's seeking this point from which only we can answer it. This will appear more evident if we consider that philosophy places every subject in its most abstract light, and seeks to bring everything it touches upon into the region of clear and definite thought, the light. Now there is in mankind a large process of latent thought, which is spontaneously produced by the spirit of the age in which they live, but is only seen as acknowledged by the mass in its outward and visible effects. Men, for the most part, view the thoughts and conceptions by which their minds are governed only in the peculiar phrases in which the literature, the arts, the regions of the ages assume. From these are the shrines on which the divinities they worship are represented in a symbolic form. On the other hand, the ideas which we can only operate upon the mass of mankind through some external channel and in some objective form become to the philosopher strictly subjective. He strips them of all their exterior dress, separates the mere appendages from the essence, and views them not of himself, but as parts of products of his own individual consciousness. In the case of the former, the subject which observes entirely separate itself from the object which is observed. The power of thought goes forth spontaneously, exerts itself spontaneously, and at length embodies itself unconsciously in various symbols, which are then looked upon as having independent existence. In the philosopher, this same thought, which has been hitherto spontaneous, becomes reflective, and the distinction of subject and object is destroyed in the complete identity that takes place. When thought becomes the object of its own study and contemplation, it is the philosophy, therefore, that the thought of every age comes to the proper consciousness of itself, and appears stripped of the different dresses in which alone it is recognized by mankind at large. In every period of the world there are some few great ideas or principles at work, which, though sunk deeply and almost hidden at the very core and center of the spirit of the age, are yet working themselves outward, and impressing their shapes upon every feature of society. What do we mean when we speak of great problems, which are gradually involving their own solutions in the progressive advancement of human things? Is not the real meaning of such expressions something of this nature? That there is some great thought which is lying at present half unconsciously in the mind of the people, and which is emerging gradually but surely more and more into the light of day? Interesting. Every age assuredly has some such thought, which appears and reappears in 1,000 different forms. It shows itself in the habits and customs which then arise. It shows itself in the spirit of the laws and institutions which are then established. It shows itself in the different schools of the fine arts, whichever take the coloring and type of the age that gives them birth. It shows itself in the literature which is then most ardently pursued. And to no little extent does it show itself in the popular forms of a religion, which then gain favor and celebrity. The thought which thus almost unconsciously governs the age, at length, comes forth in its purest and most simple form, separated from all the extraneous material which it is mixed up by the severe analysis to which it is subjected in the crucible of an enlightened philosophy. There is, if we look deep enough, an intellectual cause to be assigned for the customs and manners of society. There is a psychological ground from which springs the different forms of law and governance. Similar reasons may be found for the rise of the imaginative arts, of the different fields of literacy pursuits, and even of the various shades of religious worship, for there are but few comparatives who, uninfluenced by the spirit of the age, look through all the forms and phraseology even of Christianity itself, and gaze face to face upon the eternal idea which they embody. It is the spirit of philosophy, therefore, that is to search for the ground of all these multifarious phenomena, to look under the surface for the ideas from which they are sprung, to trace every manifestation of intelligence in human society to those primary laws of our Constitution, to which they all owe their birth, and to seek thus the completion of our knowledge by laying bare the whole superstructure down to the simple foundation on which it all reposes. Such attempts, accordingly, we consider to be inevitable, called forth as they are by the natural impulses of human mind to investigate truth to its most universal and abstract forms, and to discover the primary elements from which all knowledge takes its rise. A long one, guys. A long one. Okay. Well, let's think about that for a ticky talk. Two ticks, mine and yours, touching each other. No. So what are we kind of hearing there? I mean, pure and simple, it's like all this, again, it reiterates this idea in my mind that like every kind of person touches upon it, every kind of art form, every kind of science, every kind of understanding of human mind. We all touch upon this. Philosophy seeks to go to its fundamental limits, down to its source, down these channels into the unknown, to where it all comes from, where it's united. The place in which religion doesn't seek to go, because that's pure, that's godly, that's perfection, that's unattainable by mankind. The point in which the arts only explore these aspects of self. Like a question there in a moment, it said, when someone's making something on a canvas, is he channeling something that he sees? Is he physically creating that? Is it something within himself that's kind of defining what it is that he is seeing there? So these avenues of human thought and human consciousness must come from a source. I'm assuming what I'm getting from this. There's got to be some sort of source in which we're trying to find. And this introduction is letting you know in many pages that's the point in which we're getting to. We're just looking for the source, and from that point we start and go forward. And by each age and by each culture and by each kind of understanding of like science and art and stuff like that has explored it. It used the example of the Romans, and it used the examples in the Middle Ages, and it used the examples of the Greeks, and before that I think it's the Chinese, I think it was Chinese and stuff like that. The Oriental people, if you will. I think it was Asiatic. Interesting to think about. I love to hear if any person else, as they say in the comment section, has any idea of what it is. Maybe helps me understand it, because I'd love for someone to maybe help me out in this. I'm not going to claim that I'm a fucking genius, because I'm not. I would love to hear someone else's opinion on this and what they think is going on, and tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what I should redo or reread or rethink about. I don't mind. I'll definitely, I'll be at the whim of that. If a teacher can teach, then I'll listen. So, if you have anything that you can, what's the word? Just comment on or say, just do it. I'm not ever gonna, I'm gonna definitely be very polite to it. I'm not gonna be, I don't like that when someone gets snippy. I don't know. It's okay. It's just, if you feel like it, go for it. If you don't, it's fine. It's okay. Whenever you're comfortable with that, that's totally cool with me. Because clearly these fucking videos are going up there when it comes to view count, so somebody's watching them. So if you are and you want to talk about it, or you have questions, or you think I should ask questions, or I should read other things, just put it there and let me know, and I'll do it. I'm at your whim, man. So let's kind of think about that for a bit and see what we come up with, and then we'll move on to the next section and see what that says.